Check, check. Oh. Hi, everyone, fellow SOC scholars. How are we feeling today? Better, please. Can we get a little better than that? Shout out to all the seniors in the room. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start today's event. Nice to meet you all. My name is Kennedy Hyde, and I am a graduating senior. Thank you. Journalism major, business administration minor from St. Louis, Missouri. And welcome to the Reporting While Black Confronting Systemic Racism panel. This town hall is being co-sponsored by the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film and the Black Executive and Student Training Program, known as the B.E.S.T program. This event is an outgrowth of our third Reconstruction project in conjunction with the Solutions Journalism Student Media Challenge. Howard is one of 8 universities and the only HBCU participating in this program. Our very own Dariana Davis is the Solutions Journalism Ambassador and is an environmental justice fellow reporting for Inside Climate News. For this project, students have been examining systemic racism in various areas, from education and the environment to sports and culture, such as my article on the inequities in the fashion industry. Some of our stories trace racism through slavery in the first Reconstruction, the second Reconstruction, during the Civil Rights era, and now the third Reconstruction, which encompasses the election of President Barack Obama, the Black Lives Matter protest movement, and Trump-era white supremacy. Our work will be featured on hunewsservice.com, so make sure you go check it out, and distributed to our media partners across the country. At this time, I'd like to introduce our very own Professor and Chair Ingrid Sturgis of the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film.
Good evening, everyone, and glad you all were able to make this important conversation. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Systemic racism is deeply rooted in historical, cultural, and institutional structures of power and privilege. We see it in unequal access to education, employment, healthcare, housing, and political representation. We see it in mass incarceration. As journalists, it can be hard to report on because it operates at a structural level, and we are reporting on the ground in local communities where impact is often obscured by local issues. This panel will offer some strategies for covering large-scale issues that show up at the local level and often go unreported. This panel will also help you as journalists find ways to do your jobs to uncover these issues and to report on them in a way that impacts your community. And I think everybody will be able to take something away from this important conversation. I look forward to hearing from the speakers. Thank you very much.
I got it. All right, and just a little background. If you don't know a little bit about our chair, Sturgis, she is the chair of the Media, Journalism, and Film track and an associate professor specializing in new media in the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film in our very own SOC. She's firmly rooted in traditional as well as digital journalism. She has worked as a reporter and editor for newspapers such as the Philadelphia Inquirer, yes, the Times Herald Record, and the Poughkeepsie Journal, as well as managing editor for magazine startups B.E.T. Weekend in the Savoy. So again, let's give a round of applause to our chair. Next, we have Ms. Carolyn Ellison, who is the co-founder of the B.E.S.T program and the managing director of the Clark Construction Group. I'll give you just a little background about Ms. Ellison. So, Ms. Ellison is a co-founder and board member of the Black Executive and Student Training Program, aka the B.E.S.T program. With over 30 years of experience in the corporate world, she is best known as a seasoned marketing and corporate social responsibility executive. Most recently, she serves as the senior member of the Clark Construction Company Community Affairs Leadership Team and is focused on the company's workforce development, corporate citizenship, and community engagement efforts. Let's welcome her.
Thank you again for coming. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to tell you really quickly what the B.E.S.T program is about. It was founded about 2 years ago, and the purpose of the B.E.S.T program is to support students at HBCUs to navigate to successful careers. And we really see that as twofold. It means the conversations that don't happen in the classroom and the conversations that don't happen from the career placement office that need to happen. Over 70% of students are expected to leave their first job within the first year because they're unhappy. And so it's our goal to have two-way conversations with faces that look like ours, to have conversations to tell you what to expect and have conversations back that tell us what we need to know. And so the town hall forums are really meant to be two-way conversations to tell us how you feel about what's in the news cycle, how we need to be thinking about things. And so I really thank you for coming. I also want to thank our panelists for participating in this discussion. So I look forward to hearing what you think and what you want us to hear.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sturgis and Ms. Ellison. Now, the moment that you all have been waiting for, let's start this important conversation by introducing our speakers. First, we have Keith L. Alexander, who covers some of the district's most heinous murder cases and challenging legal issues as a crime and courts reporter for the Washington Post. Alexander has been on several Pulitzer Prize-winning teams covering the January 6, 2021 deadly insurrection at the Capitol, an unprecedented investigation of fatal police shootings across the nation, as well as the mass shootings at Virginia Tech. In addition to crime and social issues, he was a financial reporter at the Post, covering the airline industry and writing the weekly business class travel column. Alexander was a lead business writer covering 9/11 and the fallout within the airline industry. He also worked on the Post groundbreaking series, Being a Black Man. You might recognize Alexander from TV. He has also been featured in the Netflix docuseries, Web of Make-Believe, Death, Lies, and the Internet, and in an HBO documentary on fake news that later aired on CNN. And as co-host of the documentary crime series Fatal Attraction, one of my faves, on TV One. Alexander is a graduate of Howard University, HU, yes, which honored him with the Paul Robeson Award for Outstanding Achievement in Journalism. He teaches journalism here periodically and currently serves as advisor for our campus newspaper, The Hilltop, which was co-founded a century ago by Zora Neale Hurston. Let's have a round of applause. Yes. Next, we have a woman in red, Ms. Jennifer C. Thomas, who is an associate professor and journalism sequence coordinator in the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film at Howard University, her alma mater. She earned a Master of Arts degree in journalism from Columbia University. a 2020 Fulbright Specialist Scholar and Scripps Howard Foundation Teacher of the Year. She is an award-winning veteran broadcast journalist and former CNN executive producer who helped spearhead coverage during the September 11th terror attacks. She is founder of Media Ready Consulting, LLC, which provides coaching, consulting, and media relations services. Her published research and creative works examine the complex intersection of women, media, and images. A press freedom speaker and advocate, she has virtually spoken to numerous international audiences, traveled across South Africa as a special guest for Media Freedom Week, and served as the in-country guest and keynote speaker for Nigeria for its celebration of World Press Freedom Week. At Howard, she produced live election specials for PBS's WHUT TV, supervised on-location coverage of the 2016 National Convention for HUNewsService.com as well. She also reported from the United States-Mexico border with the United States Border Patrol. Her current and former students include Emmy Hurst and National Association of Black Journalists Award winners. Let's give it up for our professor. Moving right along, we have Panama Jackson, very stylish. He is an award-winning writer, author, and columnist at The Griot and host of the Dear Culture podcast on the Griot Black Podcast Network. He is also the co-founder and former senior editor of the award-winning website VerySmartBrothas.com, spelled BROTHAS. Okay. Let's see, the Washington Post cited VerySmartBrothas.com as the blackest place on the internet in a 2016 profile. Jackson is regularly featured on the issues relating race, pop culture, public policy, especially as it relates to race, general blackness, and hip hop. His work has been featured in the Washington Post, Ebony, Essence, B.E.T, The Root, Cafe Mom, and the list goes on. He is also a co-founder of the Mahogany Books and Very Smart Brothas Book Club that was also featured on the Today Show in 2021. President Barack Obama appeared at the book club meeting to discuss his book, A Promised Land. Jackson also hosted the third season of the Power podcast series produced by Something Else Sony Music Entertainment, titled Power, Don King, which focused on the legendary boxing promoter's rise and fall. He graduated from Morehouse College with a degree in economics and holds a master's degree in public policy from the University of Maryland College Park, and really, really enjoys being paid for being black. Let's give him a round of applause. And last but not least, we have Professor Yannick Rice-Lamb, who is the former chair of the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film at SOC. She is also co-founder for FierceForBlackWomen.com. Previously, she was founding editor of BET Weekend Magazine, associate publisher, and editor-in-chief of Heart and Soul. She was an editor at the New York Times, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Child, and Essence, and a reporter at the Toledo Blade. Morgan State University recently honored her with the Vernon Jaron Medal for Journalistic Excellence for her series on unintended consequences, the rubber industry's toxic legacy in Akron, Ohio. Co-published by the Center for Public Integrity and Belt magazine. The series also won the Thomas L. Stokes Award for Best Energy and Environmental Reporting from the National Press Foundation and an Investigative Journalism Award from the Ohio Society of Professional Journalists. Next month, she will receive the Outstanding Occupational Safety, and Health News Story of the Year and deliver the Upton Sinclair Memorial Lecture at the American Industrial Hygiene Association Conference in Phoenix. Lamb is co-author of Born to Win, the authorized biography of Althea Gibson, The Spirit of African Design, and Rise and Fly. Tall Tales and Mostly True Rules of B.E.S.T. She looks forward to taking the long walk with her students in a week, actually, as she receives a doctorate in medical sociology. Let's have a hand for Professor Lamb. Yes. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to Reporting While Black, Confronting Systemic Racism. As you heard from Kennedy earlier, this is kind of an outgrowth of some of our student projects exploring racism, dating back to the first Reconstruction following slavery, through the second Reconstruction during the Civil Rights era, and currently to the third Reconstruction, which began after the election of President Obama, and also looks at Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the collision of racial reckoning with the Trump-era white supremacy. So they've explored a wide range of topics, and we also wanted to do a springboard with this to have a discussion about systemic racism, because it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's a really important topic. So one of the things I wanted to ask all of you is your thoughts on systemic racism, why it's still here, what can be done about it, and what do you consider some of the biggest issues that are facing us?
All right, I'll start. Is this mic on? You got it. One, thank you for having me. Glad to be here. Look, systemic racism is not going anywhere anytime soon. You just said that. I actually agree with that. I'm not as optimistic as James Baldwin claims we all need to be a citizen of this country. I don't have no faith in white people. I hate to say it that bluntly and that straight, but that's how I made my bones on the internet and why I get paid to be a black person for a living. But like systems as a whole kind of need somebody to suppress in order to thrive. And white supremacy is a system that has been pervasive for pick your centuries. And since that benefits a certain class of people, I don't see a reason why systemic racism would ever, there's no benefit to leveling the playing field. So for that reason, I'm not optimistic about it at all. So that's why I live the blackest life I can possibly live.
Well, I echo that, and thank you for having me here on this panel to talk about this important topic. So to answer the question, no. I don't think that systemic racism will change until it's recognized as being a problem or that it even exists. And I think that primarily the political system in this country is continuing its efforts at making sure that it still exists. You know, when we talk about racism, you know, we have cultural racism, we have institutional racism, we have individual racism. And they're all alive, sadly alive and thriving in this country. And until we can address each of these levels of racism and agree that there's a problem and then collectively determine that something needs to be done about it, it's not going to change. And right now, I think it's becoming more pervasive, and I think that the political atmosphere of this country is making it just exacerbate, if anything. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you again also for having me. I guess it's unanimous on this panel. I think what we're seeing a lot of is that racism is changing how it looks. I think we're seeing it much more undercover. I think we're seeing it as in disguise of liberals who believe, well, I'm not racist, I'm a liberal. I think we're all created equal. And yet, they don't. And yet, there's this underlining, well, let's not, we shouldn't expect too much from African Americans because, they didn't have the right opportunity, they didn't have the right education. And so we should not give them those sort of assignments. They're still good people, but they're not equipped, they're not ready. And they hide behind that whole liberal agenda of, well, I don't want to come across as, I don't think that they can do the job, but let's find a different job for them. And they mask behind the whole liberalism. And I think what's happening is, what we're seeing, especially now in the last few years, we're seeing two divides. We're seeing the blatant in-your-face racism, and you're seeing the other side, the liberals, who either they don't realize they're also racist, or they don't want to recognize it, or they don't realize that what they're saying and doing is just as bad as the blatant in-your-face racism. And to me, that is what's most concerning, that hidden agenda that I'm trying to do the right thing, I'm a liberal. Well, actually what you're doing is really hurting black folks even more so than the blatant racism. So I think what's happening, we're seeing two different sides of racism coming out these days.
Thank you. And for those of you in the audience, if you could start thinking of questions you want to ask, and those of you who are online, if you could start putting questions in the chat, and we'll weave them in as we go along. So what pisses you off the most? What makes you the maddest of some of the things that are going on? Or what are you most concerned about when you think about all these bans that we have on books, attacks on curriculum, voting rights infringement? The list goes on and on.
That's what pisses me off the most.
What, the list goes on?
The list goes on and on. Mm-hmm. That we took care of one thing, and now we got 5 other things to take care of. And, it's exhausting, right? It's like, I cover crime, I cover social justice and criminal issues, and to this day, I'm amazed by certain things that I see. I will see a jury that looks nothing like independent. Or I will see an individual who has no criminal background, who is sentenced to the upper end of the sentencing guidelines. Whereas somebody else who committed the same crime, who doesn't look like me, is sentenced to a lower end of the guidelines or even put on probation because he or she had a, quote, a better attorney who advocated stronger for them. That is what, it's still seeing that today in Washington, D.C. That's supposed to be one of the most liberal cities in America.
In Chocolate City.
Well, it's not Chocolate City. It's
Neapolitan? Some people still say it's chocolate.
Carl.
Anyway.
One thing that really bothers me
Latte.
right now is this whole attack against wokeness, And I remember being recently at a conference with another academician, a white guy, and we were just having a conversation just about the political climate in the country. And he said something about, sort of in defense of wokeness. And I had to give him a Professor Thomas history lesson. And, because I remember, I think wokeness is a good thing. We need to be woke. We need to be awake. We need to know about these issues that are affecting us as African Americans and that ultimately affect all of us in the country. And so now when we have a Florida governor, and trying to incite policies against wokeness, well, what does that really mean? All the time, racism is always built on fear. And so there's this fear factor that all of a sudden, if you're awake, what does that mean? If you're woke, if you're awake, that means you're awakened. You know about what's going on. You're not sleeping on issues. So the fact that black folks are awake or we're woke, we know what's going on. And it's a good thing, I think, for all of us to know about these pervasive issues that are affecting us, not just as blacks, but seeing how they ultimately affect all of us as Americans. So that's just been something that kind of has my blood boiling a little bit. right now because it's all based on ignorance. And I was like, well, what do you think it really means? You're taking something that may have come from our culture, which is what always happens. You know, could be from our hip hop culture and being woke. And now you're afraid. What are you afraid of?
So what pisses me off the most is also the reason why I'm not optimistic, which is also the reason why I write for a living. So it's all this stuff gets tied in together. So very personally, my mother is white. My mother passed away, RIP, so you say something about my mama, we're gonna fight, but I can talk about my mama. So my mother, a white lady, white Republican, NRA, gun-toting, gun shop owning white woman from Michigan. And I cannot convince my own mother that racism exists. Things that I have had to deal with, my mother does not believe are real. We fight and argue. We stopped talking for years. Once Trump got elected, we got into a huge fight. I wrote an article about it. It's strange, like my biggest professional accomplishment was an article that I wrote called How Trump Ruined My Relationship with My White Mother. I won awards for this, and it ruined my family. My mother did not come to my wedding. Shouts out to my brother-in-law who's back there. My mother did not come to my wedding. We were in that kind of space, right? So if I can't convince the woman who birthed me, the person who loved me before I knew I existed, that there are parts of my humanity that are on the table for other people, I can't expect anybody else to believe in the things that I'm saying or to feel anything that we feel as a culture, as a community, as a people. If I can't convince that woman, and I write for a living about racism, I literally do this. You're proud of what I've accomplished, but you have no idea what you're proud of, right? So I can't lead that horse to the water and make it drink. Then I have no faith in the system whatsoever, because I have no faith in the individuals that create the systems that we have to get over in order to have equality, right? So that's why I'm entirely cynical about all of it. Systemic racism, here to stay, because there's no reason. My mother benefited, right? My mother and her husband, they benefited from all of it in a way that made it so that they could not acknowledge that there were problems for other people. My mother, this woman, rest in peace, literally introduced me to a police officer once and told me if more cops were like him, then people like me would stop fighting these fights that we're fighting. Do you know what it takes? Then that cop looked at me and was like, I don't want none of this smoke. When a cop looked at a black dude in an all-white tie and was like, nope, I'm out of this. Like, that is why I write for a living. Because somebody got to tell those stories, right? Like everything that we do as journalists is important. Writing all these stories, being in all these places. I'm an op-ed columnist type person. I write about personal experiences. I literally write my experience, not what's happening, but how it feels to be black, right? Like how it feels to exist. Not even just black, because it's just writing about life. Like sometimes I write about wings and flats, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes it's grits. Sometimes it's a police shooting, right? The ability to tell our stories and to allow people to get a window into what it's like living this life is why I do what I do, but it's also why, like that gaslighting, people refusing to acknowledge and believe, like reframing conversations on critical race theory. I hate that white people found that term, right? Like I hate it, because they just ran with it. They hopped on that joint and ran with it, and I don't even do that not all white people thing. The one white woman I had to care about is dead. My mama is gone. Now that I feel like I've got more racist since my mama passed away, if I'm being completely honest.
Oh, goodness.
And I don't want to be, but it's just like I have the one that I had to really care about and love is not here no more. Like she ain't here for me to fight those battles. So anyway, I could go on in this tangent forever, but that's why I'm pissed. That's what has me upset, and that's why I write and do the things that I do, because somebody has to tell our stories like we're all doing, and somebody has to add humanity to it, because somebody's going to read that. My favorite emails are from the white people who are like, wow, I didn't know life was like this. Like, now you do, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to change? You know, now you know better, do better.
That's deep. Yeah, that's a drop the mic moment. On that note, I was actually going to, you added some things about that, because I was talking about how do you, in your work that you all do, how do you try to address racism or counteract it? Did you have anything you wanted to add? Or?
Oh, sure, I'll do this quickly so I can mention.
Okay.
I center blackness. So I actually, years ago, I made a professional decision not to write about white people at all. I do not write about because lots of people do it better than I do, right? People who are reporting, who are actively on the ground writing about these things. But I write about the celebration of blackness. I write about celebrating black culture. I'm a culture writer. I write about music, I write about art, I write about film, I write about all of those things. And I do it because I don't like being exhausted. I don't like living in a space where I'm constantly bombarded with dealing, especially because I'm not a reporter. I'm tasked with writing, like, what is a response to this? Well, it's the same response it was yesterday and the day before that. It sucks. I can't believe there's another name that I have to remember, that I have to remember that I have to recall and share with other people. So for my own peace of mind and my own sanity, and this came at a professional cost, which maybe we can talk about later, I center blackness in a way that focuses on black joy, celebrating our culture and who we are, and why it is that being black is the greatest thing that you can be on this planet.
So if I talk about how I incorporate it in my teaching or with our future journalists, I always share my personal experiences and share why it's so important to have these conversations, but even more than that, why it's so important for us to be in the room. You know, Keith is my classmate, HGC, Howard Gospel Choir, but he's at the Washington Post. I was at NBC and CNN. We were not at black-owned media outlets. There are not very many of them to begin with. But it's important for us to be in those spaces, to be in the room. I share the story of when I graduated from Howard, started my first job in Alabama in local news. 2 weeks later, I was the only little black woman, young woman, training to be a producer. Why did I want to be a producer? Everyone was saying, be in front of the camera. Well, producers hold the power. You know, it's like being the editor, being the senior writer. I wanted to be able to make decisions and for my decisions to have impact. I needed to be in the room when some racist called the newsroom, complain about why those blackies are doing something on the air. You know, why are we covering these? Someone needs to be in the room, right? We can't live in the utopia that it's just all, but Howard is a community. Y'all are seeing, you know, Howard is a special place, but as you know from your internships, but when you leave this space, Howard is not typical of the real world. So anyway, I like to share my experiences, and so a lot of times, since I was young and had that Howard experience, I was always pushing the envelope. I was always that one saying what others were thinking. I came out of Howard like, you know, no, this is wrong, and this is why we're going to have these conversations. I was in an all-white newsroom after Rodney King when we had to talk about how we should cover it. Being able to win awards for covering stories about black people that looked like me and to share experiences and doing, you know, our version of Black and White America when it came out a long time ago, and encouraging our students to go after those stories and to do those stories as well, and to make sure that they make a space to be in that room so that they can make a difference and that their stories they tell about our people and what we experience can be put out in a larger platform. I think that's so important. And I'll leave it at that for now.
I think being in the room is important, but I think using your voice is also important.
That too.
Right.
I don't mean just sitting in the room.
And you notice somebody just sit in the room.
You know,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
that's true.
And so when you are in the room, you are in the room to use your voice.
Absolutely.
And you know, and I try to do that as gracefully as I can the first time around. If it doesn't materialize, then I get a little louder until my point is made. For example, most recently, you know, I cover crime. And if a young person, 13, 14, 15-year-old is charged in a crime that we write about, I do not use the word boy. And I've got my editors to stop using the term boy. That's a youth, that's a juvenile, it's a teenager. Call him a teenager. There's a reason why there's a 13-year-old, a teenager. And I had explained to them that boy term is derogatory. And now I've gotten editors to see that. Oh, well, you know what? Let's find a different way of describing this young person in this crime. We're not going to use the word boy. I remember when I was at USA Today, I was a business writer at USA Today, just got hired that summer. and there was the Million Man March was coming up. And USA Today was literally planning on covering the march the day of, meaning no plans of covering it days earlier, no plan of how to cover it. We're just gonna cover it as a spot news story. And I'm just at USA Today, I just started there, and I was telling editors, we need to have a meeting early September, how to cover this is going to be a big deal. I was hearing it from all my sources on Wall Street, in Hollywood, in politics, that this was going to be a huge deal. And the plan was just to cover the Million Man March as a daily spot story. And it was me saying, we have to have meetings, we have got to plan this, pull this together. With me just being at the paper, not even 6 months yet, saying this is going to be a huge deal. We need to start planning coverage now, pulling people from all sections, sports, life, money, news, to cover it and see who's going to be at the march, how are we going to cover this, and make it a big deal. Using my voice to make sure that something that is going to be important, a big deal, that they recognize this is going to be a much bigger deal. And it's things that you see, even on your beat, that they may not see. Covering a political rally and hearing ski-wee and not know what ski-wee means, or not knowing what that sound is, and calling it something, a derogatory reference in a Washington story.
Right. I saw that.
Yes, everybody saw that. And people were emailing me, like, I didn't write the story, I ain't got nothing to do with what she did. But again, it's our job to say, you know what, as a journalist, you didn't know what that sound was, you should have asked people what it was. So, again, we are needed. But it's also it's the same thing as Muslim journalists,
Correct.
Jewish journalists, gay and lesbian journalists. If we're not part of that world, bring us into the world so they can explain things to us so we can make sure that our coverage is fair and accurate, and not be ashamed and afraid to say, well, I don't want to be labeled the black militant journalist, because I'm always the same, well, we really shouldn't say this, and here's why. It really gives a negative connotation and takes away from the story, and people are going to be so upset by this one word or this one sentence, they're going to miss the entire story. And once you explain that, you're like, okay, now I get it. But having to be strong enough and bold enough to say, this isn't going to work, and here's why.
And can I just say one last thing? So I just want to share a story somewhat similar. So the last week before I started at Howard, which will be 10 years ago in August, I was still freelance. I left CNN a few years before full-time, but I was still freelancing. So it was the last week, it was in July, and they asked me if I would produce for one of the afternoon shows for a week. Well, I got the same rate regardless of what I did. And I was like, well, I want to write, maybe produce a segment, but I don't really want to do the whole show. But it's okay, it's the summer, nothing's going on. So the night before the week started, Trayvon Martin trial had come to an end. And George Zimmerman was found not guilty. And I was like, oh, here we go. So I go to the editorial meeting. So you have the meetings and you discuss what the coverage is going to be for the day. So we're in a room. People are on from New York. People are on from London. They're from all over. And you're talking. And I look around the room, speaking about who's in the room. It's me as the producer. And there was one young sister who was on the bookings team who helped bring guests in. But she was either entry level or intern. I don't remember. But all I know is the meeting started off with the senior copy editor, who I had known from my time being there for years, looking around, and someone was like, oh, so what are we going to talk about today? He. And she says, well, they lost, they just need to get over it. First of all, I'm like, really? So I had like a Medea moment where I was like, who house? My head spun around, and I'm like, are you kidding me? They should get over it, and I'm the only they in the room. So it ended up being one of those back and forth, and it got very heated. But y'all, I held my own. Mm-hmm. I'll just say by the time the meeting was over, we ended up doing 2 hours of a special during the day, a town hall about race on CNN. And at the end of that day, one of my colleagues who was Asian came up and took me to the side and apologized and said, I'm so glad we have this conversation. The anchor of the show did the same thing. The person who was the executive producer who had come from Fox, you know, he didn't like my presence being there. He was much younger, and I was just kind of halfway ignoring him anyway. But, you know, I was glad to be able to speak up and to add perspective and say, oh, no, we need to talk about why the killing of a black man in his neighborhood by this white man, and the white man being found, a black youth being found not guilty, why that's a problem. And so, you know, I think it does matter. I don't think all white people are devils. I don't think all white people mean harm. But ignorance is not a defense in a court of law. So it should not be a defense when it comes to how we report and how we receive information.
But it's interesting that dynamic that you all had, I don't know, y'all can hear me, right? Yeah. That dynamic that you all had.
People on YouTube.
Y'all can hear me on YouTube. That dynamic that you all had, I can see that being, the way you described it, I can see someone saying, that's a news story. The passion that both of y'all brought to that side says, if they're talking about it like this, then the nation is probably talking about it.
Absolutely.
So let's have a show on it. So I can definitely see why that turned into the special that it did.
That's how you find the stories a lot of times, from the passion and the discussions.
Exactly.
Keep the mic for a second, Keith. I wanted to follow up on something you said earlier. So sometimes when you've talked about covering crime in courts, you've talked about why you do cover it, why you want to cover it, and what you want to bring to that coverage. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I started out as a business writer for 20 years of my career, almost 20 years of my career. I was covering corporate America. Got sent down to New Orleans to cover Hurricane Katrina. And while down there, I realized I watched people trying to survive. And for most of my career, right out, even at Howard, I was a business writer, intern at the Wall Street Journal. I focused on corporate America, business suits, stocks, mergers, acquisitions, all that, corporate stuff. But seeing people fighting to survive, people who look like me, fighting to survive down in New Orleans was mind-boggling. And then I realized that this is what I want to cover. I want to cover these people and give them a voice and show people what it means to survive and how they survive. They may not be going through a hurricane, but they may be going through something that's similar to a hurricane in their own lives. And so I got back to DC, and I told my editor I was at a business call, a business I ran every week, and I told him I don't want to do this anymore. I really want to cover travel. Dr. Caldwell had a fit. He said, "You have your own column. How dare you give up your own weekly column at the Washington Post to basically cover crime, to cover the streets?" But to me, it was covering individuals, people who, are victims, and giving them a voice, but also covering individuals who have that responsibility, right? Police, prosecutors, judges, asking them questions that folk who look like me probably can't ask them. And asking the police officer or the police chief why this officer killed his unarmed child. What was going through his head? Why the same officer has killed 2 times before and is still on the force? I can ask those questions. And so for me, it is my ability, the opportunity to really, again, as I always say, be a voice for the voiceless and to hold the powerful accountable. Each and every time. And my little high black yellow days goes in there and asks those folks and tell them, I want to ask these questions because the people in my community want to know. And so that's really why covering crime is so important. A lot of people say, how do you cover that stuff? Someone's got to be a voice for this 12-year-old child who was killed in the streets. Someone's got to be a voice for this 30-year-old black man who is screaming up and down, he's innocent. And there really is not enough evidence to really show that he did this. Someone's got to tell that story. So that's why I do what I do.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions in the chat, and then if we can have a mic for some people in the audience so they can ask questions as well. So from Annalisa Bruner, she says, can we have someone address the capture of the Supreme Court and what that portends for us, knowing that it's truly the laws that constitute the battlefield. That's what voting is about.
The what of the Supreme Court?
The taking over control of the Supreme Court, the shift in the balance of power in the Supreme Court.
I'll let y'all folks do politics. I can't take these people.
That's why you should answer the question.
I know, I was curious to see what you have to say.
I mean, look, okay. So the question is asking about, effectively how conservative the Supreme Court is, I'm assuming, right? And how that, how it's become. So, look, radically, I hate the Supreme Court. Let's be honest with you. I think everybody on that joint has been on too long. Clarence Thomas got to go. There need to be term limits on all these things. I don't know how somebody who got there 40 years ago is sitting here 40 years later still making decisions about a culture and society that they stopped paying attention to 40 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, but I feel that same way about senators and there's no reason, there should be no job that you get to keep forever. I genuinely believe that, because who you are when you start something is probably not who you're going to be when you finish. So I struggle with, I'm not going to say I struggle with authority because that's not true, but I struggle with a court that is clearly made up of individuals who very, like, Judge Jackson, let me give her her props. Judge Jackson versus Homie Kavanaugh. Right, you saw the way that those the hearings went, right? My man is yelling. My man is up here acting a fool.
Screaming.
His mama should have been ashamed of him. I don't even know where he's from, but a southern mother, white or black, would be ashamed of that. She had to get up there and be dignified in the face of all that nonsense, right? The fact that it's like it illustrates to me what a farce a lot of these systems are, and that's why I struggle. Like it's hard for me to. Like, I understand it's the law of the land, and these are the bodies who have been tasked with providing the final decision on all this stuff, but, like, you shouldn't be able to roll back Roe versus Wade. You shouldn't be able to go back and decide something we've already litigated. You shouldn't be able to, just because who's sitting there changes the way the country that is progressing and moving in a certain direction, you shouldn't be able to regress a country just because the 9 people sitting there have no business being there in the first place. So I struggle with covering that stuff because this is why I focus on blackness. Because that stuff makes me so mad. Like you just get annoyed and upset by the fact that you can't do anything about it because some people put these folks there, and who's in office determines it.
That's what I was going to say. You know, to me, this taught us, these last appointments taught us a very important lesson. To all those people who said voting doesn't matter, to all those, the young adults in the room and the older people in the room that say my vote doesn't count, I don't like either one of them, and how many people did we hear that said that about the Trump election? Okay? Well, now we see, and this is why it's important to know your history, not just our history, but the history of the country and how political systems work. Because if you have the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, well, then you know that the executive, the president gets to help decide who gets put into those places. And if you don't vote for the person who's the leader of the free world and of the presidency, then your vote is not impacting who's getting put into office. And who's put into office can determine who they want to get in those seats. So all those people who laughed and said, oh, Trump is a buffoon, he's a clown, he's all this, yeah, he, but he had the last laugh when he got to appoint the people he did who are now sitting in the court.
Now don't forget, some of them people died while they're up on that bench and need to be gone. They should be leaving.
And that's true too, but the person in office gets to determine who comes up there. Now, we saw with Obama that didn't necessarily happen, and that's why you vote local. All politics is local. So if you vote for your congressman and congresswomen, they're the ones who make those determinations in Congress.
Unless you're in D.C.
Well, correct. No representation, right? Taxation with that. But you see what I'm saying? This is where, you get down on those levels with why voting matters. On the local level, and then that's why you continue to vote, because we put those people on office who represent us up on that Capitol Hill, which I hope y'all have been up there to cover.
Okay, thank you. We have a question in the audience.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gregory Coleman. I'm a senior journalism major and sports administration minor from Indianapolis, Indiana. I have two questions. One, when you all talked about the Supreme Court, is how do we as Black journalists really like present and push forward the belief and mere fact that you should vote in these local elections and make people like aware of their rights to vote and how they can go about voting, especially now when Republicans in different states have made laws that have restricted different things that normally will allow Black people to come out and vote. That's my first question. The second question is, without us in those newsrooms or broadcasting centers, how will the discussion of race go down? And this is particularly after viewing Don Lemon's situation that got him removed from CNN when he talked to old boy about like the whole Black people in the NRA rights, and he was trying to lecture Don Lemon on Black people's experiences, even though Don Lemon himself is a Black person. How do we go about those two things?
Okay, and the first question, I think part of what you said at the end answers that a little bit, I think, is connecting the dots for people so that they see how they got to those laws. So if you look at some of the laws in Florida about whether it's banning certain books or changing things in the curriculum, as Professor Thomas was saying, that's right there on the local level. So if people see that happening on the ground, and those things become trends, because once they happen over here, they happen in other places, as we saw with some of the abortion bans and law after law after law that's unturning different things that we've had before. Anybody want to follow up on that?
And I also think it is, connecting the dots, it is, DeSantis, that the governor won by this margin, and reminding people that this is who's elected, this is how much he won by, and those type of stories. Just keep reminding people that this person is in office making these decisions as a result of an election. And just keep reminding people of that over and over again, that this person is doing exactly what he or she was elected to do. And the person who lost by this margin, who will not be doing exactly what's happening now. Reminding people, that's our job, is to remind people in those stories that this is happening as a result of an election, and this person got into this office by getting this many percentage of the votes.
And I was just at a conference last week last week around this time in Richmond, on covering local news. And one of the student reporters in the room asked the question, similar question. She said she was trying to do stories in her local paper in Virginia, her local school paper. She just wanted people to vote, she said. She just wanted people to vote. And what she was asking our panel, what can we say to students like her who want to make sure to get people to vote? So there's different ways you can look at it, but as a journalist, are you advocating for something to happen, or are you informing? Or can you do both? Can you inform, and by the information you're presenting, help advocate for an action? So what do we mean by that? So like Keith was saying, you show the ramifications of what happens with that vote. But also, as young adults telling stories, you share information. Where can you go to vote? What are the parameters around that? What are the deadlines? What does that look like? What about people who've never voted before? What does it look like on a college campus? Shout out to Jason here, who with HUABJ was actively advocating for voting and letting people know, what the deadlines are if you live out of town. All those things that you want to know that you don't. You have that power to even just get the information out there and then do those stories that show, well, this is what happens. Profile someone who, in our coverage of election night, one of our students in the broadcast capstone talked to a 63-year-old who was voting for the very first time. And he said, why? Tell stories. We have to have that humanistic side to let people understand why these things matter. And that's how I think you can inform and advocate.
When Obama was elected, I found a couple. He was 102, black couple. He was 102, she was 100. And it was the first time they were ever voting in a presidential election. And I had them all lined up, and then their daughter died. 87-year-old daughter died. So they just shut down on me. But that was the way I was going to talk. Like, this 100-year-old couple had never voted in a presidential election prior to the Obamas. Damn. Yeah. Right. Right. And that was going to be a page one story, and then the daughter died. And they didn't want to talk to me anymore.
All right, and let's, I mean, that is, yeah, that's a
Daughter.
daughter, yeah. Let's talk about Don Lemon right quick. All right.
I know Don.
Listen, I'm happy for you. I don't have nothing bad to say about Don Lemon. Don Lemon didn't get fired because of that interview right there. They've been trying to get Don out of there for a minute. Now, at the same time, let us be honest, I appreciate Don's turn, because we were not rocking with Don Lemon 10 years ago. We wouldn't have cared that Don Lemon got fired. We would not have cared one bit. I don't know what happened. Don, somebody slipped that man some Kool-Aid, and which is crazy because he's from Baton Rouge. Like Don Lemon is a very black life. Like that man is, he's from down south in a way that but your question was about like people being removed from those rooms. Like you're losing Don Lemon at CNN is a loss for the community and voice, right? That's where you're going with it, right?
Well, they got Gayle King and Charles Barkley now.
Well, and like we get in Charles Barkley speak his mind for better or worse. So let me say this.
He's had some Kool-Aid too.
Charles is a special one of our Alabama people, but you know. So let me say this. So I work at the Griot, black-owned media outlet, right? That most people don't read. Let's be real. We all kind of go and focus on all the mainstream media outlets. I did this series at the Root when I was there years ago called The Black Mainstream. And the reason I did this is because I used to listen to this podcast. The person that I got my writing steez from, his name is Bill Simmons. Writer from, everybody knows who Bill Simmons is, you probably listens to Ring, whatever. But Bill Simmons gets so many facts about blackness wrong, it pisses me off. My man speaks about hip-hop and don't know nothing. Like, he'll get songs wrong and all this stuff. So we were watching this podcast, he was doing Van Lathan, and they were doing Coming to America. And in this Coming to America, they do this thing at the end where they talk about Apex Mountain, like what the highest road for these people was. And they started talking about Arsenio Hall. And, you know, I think Bill was like, Coming to America's got to be his highest moment. And Van Lathan didn't shut him down. And I know Van, and I'm like, wait a minute. Y'all forget the Arsenio Hall show existed. What you talking about? Like Arsenio, and nobody shut him down. I was hot. I was like, there's an entire different mainstream culture that exists outside of white America that we tap into. So I was like, I'm going to do an entire series that's going to focus on black mainstream, things that are fact to us. But it doesn't matter what the outside communities think or know about this stuff. So I had somebody write an article about The Coldest Winter Ever, the book by Sister Soldier, because every black person I know was reading that book, right? And I don't know if white people know that exists. The second book was terrible. But, you know, it was horrible, right? So bad. But, you know, right, so I wrote a book, I wrote an article about Arsenio De La Soul on the Arsenio Hall show. I had somebody write about the fact that in the 90s, we pretty much treated Georgetown like it was an HBCU. Oh, we did. John Thompson out here got Kente on the jerseys and stuff like that, right? So my point is, the long story short of this is, maybe we got to stop looking to the white outlets to provide the validation that we're looking for in the black community to tell those stories. Easier said than done, and I think it is important that we're in all the white spaces. So let me be very clear about that. We have to have seats at those tables because that's still the mainstream dominant culture. They're still going to tell you, if we're not there to help tell those stories, they're going to tell them anyway, and they're going to ruin them, and they're going to make life difficult for all of us. But I do think we have this problem of not supporting our own institutions the way that we should because we view them as less than. And we got to stop viewing them as less than. Now, some of that's on us. Sure. Uncut was way more popular than any news show that was on B.E.T. I know this. I would be up at 2 o'clock in the morning watching Joker the Bail Bondsman and all these people who had no business making songs, but I watched it all, right? So I feel like as a kind of big bullet point, we have to figure out ways to both care more about our own media outlets and want to be in those spaces. And I'm going to say this as somebody who goes to NABJ every year, it doesn't even feel like black outlets have any space there. It seems like everything is just about white news. So like it's just 100% about non-black spaces. Like I genuinely feel that way. And it's very frustrating because it's like, we right here, y'all. Like we right here. But we need to have people in the spaces, like the work that y'all do is important. It's vastly important, especially in DC with crime, right? Because right now, you watch, like, the crime is out of control. And I live in Southeast, so, and on purpose. Like, I bought a house in Southeast DC on purpose, and it goes down. I live in Congress Heights. I live in the part of South. I live in Ward 8. I live in the poorest part of DC, like literally the poorest part of DC, where things go down, and it's very difficult because I have 4 children. And I'm a little street smart from MLK, like my house on MLK in Atlanta, like, I understand that part. My wife ain't as street savvy, you know what I'm saying? She like to walk in the street at night on the phone. She looked like a robbery in progress to me, and I have to tell her these things. And I don't let my kids go outside and play in this because it's like, so we need people telling us. And the point is, we need to look to our media as much as we look to mainstream media, and we have to make sure that we maintain spaces in these mainstream media spaces. Don Lemon gonna be all right.
No, I was just going to talk about Don Lemon. So I was just going to give a perspective from a former CNN executive producer perspective. And knowing how people are looking at, I do agree that, and this is just my own personal opinion, that this was part of the plan. And I said to my class, we had this conversation a few weeks ago when it first happened. But to your point about having the conversation with the Indian or Indian American Republican candidate the other day when he was back and forth about telling the black man how he felt. So I think the issue that the network forgot, and that Don may have forgotten, is that when you have a show at CNN in prime time with your name on it, you have license to speak your mind.
Right.
And he did for years. And people can argue whether or not he was black, woke, whatever. But it was his show. He could say what he wanted. He could bring people on. He could spar back and forth. And that's what he did for years. Well, they moved him out of that space into a whole different space. I was quoted by the AP in some articles about what's going on with CNN. This was just a couple weeks ago. And my point was, now he's in a space where he's surrounded by, the other white women, women anchors, and he's still operating in his own personal space, where it's his own show. He's giving and that's not the same space. 2 different shows, 2 different platforms, 2 different types of audiences, and you don't have those same liberties. And he failed to see that. And I don't know how much of a plan that was for the network to have him in those spaces, but I think that's why, as you saw his co-anchor, who just sat back and didn't say a word until it was in. It was like, oh, we'll have to have you back next time to talk about this. And one of my students pointed out, the first thing he was saying was, if you all get out of my ear, well, the producers were probably saying, keep it moving, let's move on. He was like, oh, no, I got this.
He said, I'm gonna get fired today, but I'm gonna go all the way out.
Right. So, at some point you have to take your,
Don gonna be all right.
Yes, he will. But that's, to me, my perspective of what, why he spoke in those same spaces where others may not have. He's been doing that for years. That was his show. That's what he did. And his name was on the show.
Okay, we have another, we're wrapping up soon because our time is winding up a little bit. So we have another question in the chat from Joyce Davis of Atlanta, who's a Howard alum. What can be done about the impact that the intentional discrediting of the media is having on the ability of journalism to hold people and institutions accountable for the outcomes of systemic racism?
I'm sorry, read that again.
Okay, what can be done about the impact that the intentional discrediting of the media is having on the ability of journalism to hold people and institutions accountable for the outcomes of systemic racism? So that goes back to Trump saying, they lie.
Oh, yeah.
All that stuff, and how that affects people's fake news and how that affects the job of journalists.
It's interesting. Prior to the previous administration, being a journalist was like a badge of honor. Your press pass, you wear it outside, you walk around, and then all of us, when that happened, we had to hide our press passes, our badges put inside. We became targets. We really became targets. And not just in person, but on social media. Folk who I grew up with were attacking me. I was amazed. I mean, those I went to preschool with.
Oh, goodness.
Preschool with were attacking me because they were drinking all that Kool-Aid. And I was blown away by the drumbeat. They got caught up in that drumbeat of anti-press.
Yeah.
And all that did for me was just make me want to do my job even more. That just, you don't like me now, you're going to hate me tomorrow. Because I'm going to give you another story to hate me. And I'm going to find those issues that are dearest to you, and I'm going to investigate those, and put those issues, whatever those issues are, and expose whatever those are, and make you really hate me. I mean, if you don't trust me now, we just wait. I'm going to give you a reason not to like me. So I guess what I'm saying is that it fueled me as a journalist. It fueled me that, okay, these folks don't like me, I'm going to keep holding the powerful accountable. Keep going after those stories. I just got to do it while watching my back. But that's all. I mean, that's why we get into this business. We didn't get into this business, to be fearful and to be afraid. We got this business to fight using our words and to expose, untruths. Did I answer that question? Probably.
Yes. So we have another question in the audience.
Hello, I'm Taylor Nash. I'm a senior here at Howard. My question is open to all panelists. It's about how you have found the balance between remaining authentic as a Black person in journalism, sharing the Black experience and the stories that, are surrounded that, and being ethical as a journalist. Like making sure that the stories that you tell aren't rooted in biases or in terms of putting out this specific kind of narrative or surrounding Black people. So how have you found the balance in your respective fields?
I can speak on that first, and thank you. That's an excellent question, and that's something that we talk a lot about in our classes, especially, hopefully, if some of you haven't taken it, you will take our journalism ethics next semester, where we talk about these specific things. So I think it's very important to be truthful and accurate in your reporting, right? That's the first thing. I always used to tell rooms, classrooms and other rooms that I would speak in, that if you watched any of my newscasts, whether I was in local news or at NBC or CNN, that if you watched my show, you would not know who I was, you wouldn't know where I leaned, you wouldn't know anything about who was behind it. But what you would know is that you were getting fair coverage, and that you were getting ethical coverage, and that you were getting complete coverage. Now, what does that look like as a Black woman? Well, for me, as a Black woman, that means to tell the stories from that other perspective that Keith talked about, to tell how laws and policies affect people who look like me from that person's perspective. If we talk about crime in the city and curfews, what does that mean for the Black woman who doesn't get off work till 10 o'clock and has to walk home and go pick up or her child has to go home because the mother's at work? Tell the story from a perspective that other people may not realize. Now I'm adding balance, and I'm adding a different, fresh perspective, and we talk about being fair, accurate, interesting, thorough, and human as journalists, having faith. Now we're giving that human perspective to a story that is an important perspective. That doesn't mean I'm pro-Black. That means it can mean I'm pro-Black, but it just means I'm telling a story. It's still a story, it's still based, and I'm giving a holistic view of an issue. And I think that's what we can do as Black journalists and that's what I've been doing from the moment I left Howard, and I'm very proud of that.
And I think it also means finding a quote that you don't agree with and put that in your story to balance it out.
Yeah, you have to show both.
You've got to show the side that you're like, I don't agree with what this person is saying, but it's their perspective. And that ensures balance, right? And so that just, if the story reads all one-sided, then it's going to probably say, you can tell the writer's is a really biased story.
But if it's a lie,
right,
you got to call it out.
Right.
If someone says something, and they're giving a statement that's just not true, then that's when you call it out, like what Don Lemon was doing, right? But that's when if someone is trying to give a part of a story that's just not based in fact, and we have a lot of that after the Trump era where, That's why the CNN did that commercial, this is an apple. You can say banana, 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 but it's still an apple. So you have to be able to call that out too in your reporting, and don't just quote someone because they're crazy and they say something that doesn't make no sense.
But also you guys have that balance.
Yes,
I
you have to.
want to talk about Don Lemon. I didn't want to say Don Lemon, but I've got to go there because you need to know that Don, to me, as I'm not talking about personally, I know the brother,
Yeah.
but journalistically, I always had an issue with him because, and y'all used to know I had it here, he always insert himself
Yeah.
in the stories, and I'm old school.
Yeah, well, we don't.
Well, we don't insert ourselves.
Well, that's it, yeah.
And it was always, when you were white, it was always about him. And that drove me crazy. It became a lot about Don. I think about the story numerous times. I remember when he had the Eddie Long alleged victims on his show years ago. These young men, Eddie Long shirt, a pastor in Atlanta, who said that this pastor had raped them. Don Lemon had these young men on his show talking about the incident. And during that show, he talked about his own being sexually molested. And I'm like, Don,
No, I have not done.
hey, don't you? These young men are telling the world about what happened to them. They're opening up, and you're going to insert yourself as if y'all's story's not that important. Let me tell you about mine. And he's done it numerous times. So for me, I was never a fan of his journalism. And so I think when they put him in this new position, they knew he was going to fail. Because they knew he's not used to that. He's not used to being a traditional journalist. He's used to having his own show, inserting his own voice. It was a setup. And he did exactly what they knew he would do.
I'm a non-traditional journalist. I don't even call myself a journalist, I'm gonna be honest with you, because I don't know that I've earned or had the training that my colleagues up here have had in a way that I think engenders me calling myself that. I'm somebody who started out blogging. I came up in the blogger world, right? Now, but what that means is the balance that I have is a little bit different. If I don't show up with my authentic black self, I lose my audience immediately and then I'm irrelevant. Right? I had to create a space that was very true to who myself and my partner was. He's still alive, Damon Young. We created a website called Very Smart Brothers, and we spoke about our experiences, and we were the story, right? We had to insert ourselves in the story to give it validity. When we wrote things that seemed pandering to one way or the other, we got called on it immediately. And the problem that we have is, if you take yourself out of the story, anybody, you not being central to the story, since I have to be central to it, if I lose my credibility, I'm gone. In a new media world, it's so easy to replace everybody in that space. So my balance was one of being authentic, being genuine, being real, giving a perspective that was honest to me, that felt honest to me, which takes a while to build up. I'm a writer who uses voice as my essential tool to create my art, my content, right? My voice is essential to it, my stylistic choices and all that stuff.
But that's important, though, that he has that platform to do that and to be that. And it's very important. And I'll say even now as a tenured professor who can, and that's one reason I left CNN. Well, I say that for a reason, but I left CNN freelancing here in DC in 18, 17 or so, I can't remember, because I was I have too much to say. And as long as I'm in that space, I can't really freely give my opinion because ethically, I'm still employed by this company I'm now speaking out about. So I was I'm out. But it's still sometimes, I'm not completely comfortable all the time speaking my opinion as a journalist that can make the critique because I'm so much into that space that we're talking about. So it's excellent that you have that platform and that you created one for people to be able to hear what you think, which is what many people can relate to. So there's a purpose for that.
And to piggyback on that, literally, when did Bodak Yellow come out? Oh, whatever year that was. Whenever that was. Some of y'all weren't even in college at that point. Whenever that song comes out. All right. I got asked by the New York Times to write an article about the cultural significance of Bodak Yellow. I was like, why? This song is not culturally significant. It bangs. It's good. It rides in the whip. It rides in the house, it gets you hyped, like you can beat people up to this song, you can cook to it, you can clean to it, anything you need to do, this song works. And the editor, who I won't name, was like, no, but we need an article that states the cultural significance. Like, there is none. I can't write this article because what you're asking me for is not important to people that might read it. You're trying to create a there, and it's not one. Like, so I was like, I can't do this. And they was paying really well. Like, I was getting checks, like, with multiple zeros in them checks, right? Like, and I'm just like, I can't do this because I feel like I'm gonna be letting people down. And people are gonna read this and know that I'm faking it because I'm going to be making up everything. Aside from the line is like, this joint is amazing. Well, you know, in the black community, Bodak, which could be the blood version of Kodak, is like, why would I do that? Why am I gonna do that in a white space? Like, that ain't your business. If you don't know, you don't need to know. Like that, if you know, you know. Like that matters. That's my code of ethics as a writer, right? That stuff matters to me. Like, I don't believe in over-explaining things to white people in articles. Like, that's why I stopped writing for the Washington Post. Honestly, that's why, because I will say my claim to fame over there is I'm the first person to get the word ninja put in there for the N-word. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but I did do that. 2011, I wrote an article about new Negroes in brunch, and I got past the editors with the word ninja. Again, I don't know if this is a good or bad thing, but I did.
Did they know?
Yes, I had a black editor who pushed it through trying to see if he was going, Chris Jenkins, we'll see if it's going to work. And he got it through. But anyway, the point is, like, my personal code of ethics wouldn't let me do something like that because then I'm going to lose all my credibility, which is the currency in my space. So the balance I have is my personal, the currency I've built up as a writer and as a content creator over time, like, it's so fragile because it's so easy to take. And I don't have, like, I'm not just a byline. Like, Panama Jackson is an entity at this point. And if I lose that, I lose my career. Like, the whole thing is gone, and I got to go back to working on Capitol Hill. Good job, don't want to do it again. So, like, that's the balancing acting for non-traditional journalism, which, again, I don't want to disrespect y'all by calling myself a journalist.
But that's your brand.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem. I'm a brand. As a
That's not a problem.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
That's the wrong thing. That's your brand. That works for you. And I'm not there yet to establish a brand. And maybe one day I will get there. But right now, I'm still at the Washington Post, where I got no stories to tell. And I remember thinking back, you got Ninja in. I had to write a story to explain the difference between the N-word, hard, G-E-R, and G-A. Because a white bicyclist used this in Georgetown, hurled this world, bicycles, right? That's right? Okay.
No, you nailed it.
Well, yeah, so
That difference, right?
You already know what I'm doing when I said that, right? Okay, so the other man was coming behind him, and he hurled that word at him, and hit him and attacked the black driver. And so his argument was, I didn't use the ER, I used the GA in court. And I had to explain that in my story.
This is why I write about black people. This is why I write about white
And
people.
so I was like, I don't get this.
Oh my God.
Why is this as the lens? I don't understand. And so I had to explain the Negro, versus the other one. And they were like, but I still don't get it. And so it was a back and forth. But it showed that no one else would write that story.
I would pay to write that story, by the way. I would pay good money to write that.
But I remember that, and I remember the judge was a sister, and the judge told this boy, neither will suit you well in your future. I refuse. Because his argument was, I listen to hip hop, I'm from DC, I can use the gun, I'm down, dude knew what I was saying, and the judge like,
No.
no. And so, and I had to come back, and I thought it was going to be easy getting that in the story. And it was like, take that out. Like, no, you can't take it out.
You can't. It's essential.
This is important. This explains who he is and who he thought he was. And it was a whole back and forth that literally rose up to the top levels of the paper.
Wow, that's crazy.
About God versus Earth.
That's crazy. That That's one of the benefits of working in black spaces, because you don't have to go through the Black Studies 101 and have questions like, what's a high top fade? And then they say, it's a haircut that fades, and walk away. And just leave them scratching their head.
You hope that that's not the case, because I got to be honest with you. I done work with some black folks that don't know things too, and I'm.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
We assume that black.
That's when you take the black card away.
We assume that we've all. Listen, you are, for those of you, since y'all are at HBCU, your experiences, the stuff that you are privy to, is very different than what your folks know at these white schools and some of these places. Like, the connection to blackness is completely different, and that will manifest itself, I promise you, the first time somebody looks at you and says, who's Bootsy Collins? And I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm using that as an example just because I'm gonna be talking to the homie Bootsy Collins pretty soon. But like when you're in a room, every black person they created equal. Just know that one too, because there are some black people who will be over here like, I don't get the difference either.
Yeah.
And that will make you just as mad.
Yeah, and I think it's important as you're going into your careers to recognize we are not a monolith. Even here at Howard, right? You know, I remember having a student one year saying that she was looking at transferring because she didn't feel comfortable here. She was from a predominantly white spaces in LA. We have students here, some who were homeless, some who were in boarding schools, and all in between. And she said, I like anime. I said, okay, well, there's other people who do too. Well, I like this. And she wanted to go to another school, and I won't say where, but that didn't work out. So she came back. Why y'all laughing? Anime. Come on, people like, anime. Why'd you go up? Oh, okay.
Your inflection.
Oh, my inflection.
I would have said that right either, so.
You know what I meant. Come on now.
They're going to just dissect stuff.
Yes. Anyway, the point of the matter is, she didn't feel comfortable in her black space at Howard, right? She didn't fit in. She didn't listen to all the hip hop. She wouldn't have known what the song was. She was, that was not her space. And I said, there's a space for you still here at Howard. Everyone who's here is not going to be up on the yard for the hip hop artists. If Drake comes, everybody ain't going to be there to listen to him necessarily. Everybody is not in that same space, and we have to, y'all like, yeah, they would.
That's the beauty of Howard.
But that's the beauty, right? But to your point, what you're saying is, you may go into some newsroom and some other spaces where your brother you think is going to side with you is not relating to you on any level. And you can't make the assumption because you're both black that you both will be in that same space.
And they might not get in line with you when you do have to confront something, too.
And they could be the person you report to, your supervisor. I never like to say the word boss. Your supervisor, that could be the person who sits next to you. It could be the person who reports to you. But just don't make that assumption. That's all I want to say.
Can I ask a real quick question? Do any of y'all know how to play spades?
Of course. I don't.
And some of y'all don't. This is exactly the point. Even at HBCU, some of y'all don't know how to play spades, and this is baffling to me. But this is a dividing thing in the black community. This points out how different we are as people. Everybody should know how to play spades.
Just like the grips.
My wife went here to Howard, graduated from Howard, can't play spades to save her life. Wow. And it's just, as black as it gets, but
How do you play Uno?
We should have a tournament.
Oh, you can stack as many draw twos and draw fours as you want on top of others. Or you can stack them. In my house, you don't even just draw one card and you draw until you get the card you play. You might have 40 cards in your hand by the time you play. Ask my brother-in-law. He know we did that at Christmas, boy. It was a wrap.
But that might be part of the answer to this next question. So it's from Kendra Lee, and she says, how do each of you deal with burnout and self-care? So spades is part of self-care.
I'll start.
Okay.
So I'm still working on that. I'll say that.
I think we all are.
Yeah, I'm still working on that. And, I'll say about this Gen Z, this generation, y'all will take your self-care. Y'all, yeah. Sometimes to your own detriment, we're like, y'all hope you take your self-care and remember to turn in that paper when it's due. But, is that true, right?
So you're going to need some more self-care.
Or you're going to need different type of self-care when you get back home, right? But, no, seriously, though, I think for me, it's learning. We have to disconnect from this. I don't allow this in class, right? We have to learn how to completely disconnect when we need to be able to just be. You know, let's read a book. I require everyone in here that's journalism will get a book in the Journalism Practicum Book Club. Read. Take time to read. Whatever you like to do, if it's getting your nails, if it's getting a massage, if it's listening to music, if it's taking a hike, yes, we hike too, right? Whatever it is and whatever that feels like, take time to do it and disconnect from all of that. Because when we, coming up, when we have these traumatic events that we cover for a living, we did a Reporting While Black covering 9/11 before, covering January 6th. Those are things that really do weigh on you seriously and can affect your mental. You have to learn how to cut that off. I love listening to music. I sing. I love gospel music. Whatever that is, make sure you take time to disconnect and just be.
I didn't realize, I was at a seminar a few years ago at NBJ, and I didn't realize that journalists who hear stories, when you interview a victim of a crime or you're covering things, that you are taking in whatever they are dealing with, that emotion, and you're absorbing that, and you're taking that with you. I didn't realize that. So you have your own PTSD, right? Yeah. And I never realized. I just thought I was just doing my job, and once I typed my story, I moved on to the next story, not realizing that I just interviewed this grieving mother who lost both her children, or 4 children on fire, that I'm taking that with me day after day after day, even though I think I've moved on. Mm-hmm. And so realizing that, yes, I can still also suffer from PTSD by the stories that I cover. I tell people all the time, I have a very low tolerance for people with drama. I cut people out quickly. If I see the drama coming, I see people who are always angry, who has a lot of, just who don't appreciate life, who don't laugh, who are full of joy on a regular basis, can't be around me. Because I see all the negativity in court every day. I don't want to come home to that. And so I'm very choosy about who I've had in my personal space. And a lot of people we all know, bring drama with them wherever they go. God bless you in your journey. You can't be with me in mine.
Protect your peace.
You are correct. Protect your peace. And I think that's what I've learned, is that I've got to protect it, because I won't be any good going the next day having to cover another crime story, and a grown man's crying in front of me about losing his young son, and I start crying with him. That's not going to help. That's not going to get the story. So I've got to be strong enough and have my mindset. So that's what I do. And I tell people all the time, I believe in the 2 J's, Jesus and Jack Daniels. And so one or the two is going to work. And I go with that. And hallelujah. Amen.
I mean, I can't really argue with that.
Jesus and Jack, yeah.
Sound like a party. So, one thing about self-care is that you have to take time. Like, you actually have to do it. It gets really easy to just work yourself into a frenzy or a prison or a space where you can't see outside of what you're doing. I'm a writer who writes original content based on my own experiences daily. The pandemic was hell. I'm an extrovert. I'm somebody who gets a lot of material just from being out. I walked around this campus before I came in here, and I got all kind of ideas of things to write about, like something to just spark it. I was in the house for years, just sitting in my space. Couldn't think of anything to write about anymore because I wasn't seeing anything new, right? I'm struggling, but I still have to produce. I still have to create something. So I started writing nonsense, right? Like stuff that just wasn't good, in my opinion. Every now and then some great idea would come about or whatever, but I learned that sometimes I just had to literally remove myself from my house and go and find a way to get the peace and space that I needed. So sometimes you have to take it for yourself. And I do agree, this generation is really good at doing that. My parents' generation was terrible at that. My father still, up until he retired recently, just would not take days off of work for no reason. Mm-hmm. I've gotten better at that. I just take a week off. I need the time because I just need to not do anything. I don't think y'all generation have a problem with that at all. Like, y'all be like, yo, how many days off do I get to start this job? I want to take all 3 months right now. I want to start off without working for 3 months, and then I'm gonna come back, and I need that to build up quickly. So I don't have no fear for y'all, but just, you know, everybody's gonna get burned out. That's just a natural part of any job or any vocation. You just gotta learn how to find ways to push past it and get a little bit of peace for yourself. Jesus and Jack is a really, I'm 43, that is a really good way of doing it. I'm going to suggest it as a home remedy when I get home.
And someone in the chat, they backed that too. They said, J&J, Keith, LOL. So work hard and play hard, or J&J is Mr. Keith L. Alexander says. Okay, so we're unfortunately at the end of our program, so I'd like to thank a few people before I give the panel the last word, because they have lots of words to say. So we'd like to thank everyone from the B.E.S.T program, Carolyn, Ellison, and Tracy Trammell, Will Dawson, and thanks to Kennedy Hyde for being the host, and Jamaica Kalika, and Body Cross, Professor Sturgis over here, Clifton Jones, also known as CJ, and DeAndre McIntyre for helping with this, and anyone else who did anything. And those of you who are covering it, thanks you for coming in the audience as well as online. And so for the rest of you, any parting words for members of the community or for students that you'd like to share?
I'll just knock it out, and I'll let the professional.
You're saying it.
Look, it's corny, but I do believe the children are our future, and if you teach them well, let them lead the way. I'm not calling y'all children, but you all are people. You all are here because you believe in telling stories and believing in speaking truth to power. We need that more than ever. It is essential. It is not a luxury. At this point, it is mandatory. We need people to tell our stories and tell them the right way and ensure that we have voices in spaces where people don't want us. So I applaud and appreciate all of you who will take that mantle and run with it, because you don't even know right now how important that is. We have the benefit of experience and years in an industry that for many people tries to keep folks out, but we're still here and not going anywhere. But we need more people to look like us in those spaces with us to do that work. So keep going. Congratulations to all you who will graduate. I'm proud of you, even if I don't know you. I'm proud of you like I'm family, because trust me, I've been in your seats. We all been there, and getting out of an HBCU ain't no crystal stair, as they say. So congrats and much power to you.
And we hope to have him as part of our family in the fall. To teach here.
Oh, he's coming to teach them?
We're working on it.
Still working on it?
No, it's going to happen. We're going to make it happen.
Come on.
Well, I just want to thank you, Professor Lamb and organizers for this, and thank you all for coming. We know this is the last week of the semester, but we're going to finish strong. Congrats to the seniors. I'll just say I have two parting things that I'd like to leave with you. One is for all those, and these are for students and those who are watching who may be in journalism. But I think it's a good time for you to really reflect on why you are called to do this. Journalism is a calling.
There's a lot of leftover words.
Yes, it's a calling, and you all could be doing lots of other things. We know what they say about us in School of B and other places in COAS. But, you know, I encourage you to figure out or re-examine why it is that you want to be a media professional or a journalist. Write it down. This is something I have my capstone students come up with their own journalism quote. And refer to that as you start your career. So mine, that I've been using for a while, is that journalists are the defenders of democracy, freedom fighters of the First Amendment, and savvy and sophisticated storytellers. What is your journalism quote? What is it that makes you want to get up and do this grimy work, you know, day after day after day? So and just do that And then my second thing is that just be authentic and be true to yourself. My last little quote, this an anonymous quote I've been using since high school, is that I can do two things in life. I can dissolve into the mainstream, or I can be distinct. To be distinct, I must be different. And to be different, I must strive to be what no one else but I can be. Be you.
Both these.
You're the man for the job. You got it.
You know, my quote, you all have heard it numerous times, right? Be a voice for the and hold the powerful accountable. Exactly, and that is my mantra. That's why I do what I do. I was thinking just a few weeks ago, literally just a few weeks ago, we did a story about a police officer who was not, no charges were filed against a police officer for killing this guy down at the wharf at a restaurant. And we had a file photo of this police officer from years ago when he was in a program, and the editor chose a photo of this officer from years ago with a big grin on his face to run with the story that he wasn't being charged in killing this black guy. I said, no, you won't. That was my byline on the story. There's another photo in there of this guy, not the same officer, not smiling. I said, optics matter. Optics matter. That's why we are in the newsroom. And once I pointed out to them, they said, oh, I get it now. Sometimes they just don't see it. That's why we're there, right? We are there to make them see something that they consciously or because of where they grew up or how they grew up, they'll see the things that we see. And we've got to step up and speak up. And so I applaud you all for wanting to do that. It's fun, it's a lot of work, and you will be discouraged many times. But it is a calling. It's a calling that you want people behind you to see stories and make sure that they see those stories are fairly represent you and your family, your neighborhood, your church, whatever, your sorority, your fraternity, whatever. You want to make sure that the words that are used in those stories are fair. And that's why we do what we do. And I think it's one of the most powerful things that we can do. As journalists, we can't change the world, we're going to change a little bit of our space. And that's what we try to do as journalists. So I just want to say, oh, real quick, Clark Construction. A shout out to Clark Construction. If you all don't know, Clark Construction is basically has built Washington, D.C. All these new buildings that are out here, there's only certain companies that have license to build in Washington, D.C. because of the capital, right? You have to be screened. So Clark Construction is one of those, like one or two companies that whenever you see these guys, anything built in D.C. is one or two buildings of companies that do it. That's Clark Construction. That says a lot about that company. I just want to say that a little bit. That's the business journalism that we talk about from back in the day when I was at Clark Construction. So, but thank you all for having me, and thank you all for actually spending time and asking great questions. And I see Hilltoppers in the house. Hillfire. There you go. I'm so proud of y'all. Anyway, that's all.
Please join me in.
JBJ.
Shout out to my classes. HU, please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you, Dr. Lamb.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Professor Lamb, you really did amazing. Let's give Professor Lamb a round of applause. I know I walked away definitely with some gems from all of our panelists, so thank you all very much for coming to instill some words of wisdom to all of us, especially the seniors. It's really touching to have just the final parting words, so thank you so much. Everybody, have a great rest of your day, and make sure to keep up with all of the panelists. Make sure you look at the flyer that has been circulating around, or contact Professor Lamb or one of us so we can get you in contact with one of these lovely moderators and panelists.